Okay, so you've thought a little bit about the justification for paternalism. There are a couple of main arguments justifying paternalism. One is that people don't really have all the information they need to be able to make good decisions, and so the government needs to make some of those decisions for them. It's similar to what a parent would do for a child, right? A kid may say, "Why can't I have ice cream for breakfast?" Or "Why can't I just watch TV all day?" Or "Why can't I do this? Why can't I do that?" Um, Kids don't necessarily have all the information that's available, or may not be able to understand all the information. And so parents need to make some of those decisions for them. Similarly, many adults in our society may not have all the information necessary to be able to make good decisions. So maybe they don't know the statistics about fatality rates if you're not wearing your seatbelt. And they think, well, nothing really bad can happen. It's not a big deal. But it is a big deal. What's currently happening with the coronavirus. Um, they're having to sort of legally enforce that people stay in their homes because they may not know all the information about why it's important to stay away from other people. Or people might say, and you're hearing this a lot, like, "Well, I'm young and healthy, and nothing will happen to me." And people who say that don't really understand that the issue isn't that you won't get sick. The issue is that you may not have symptoms, but you may carry the disease to somebody else who could get really sick and die. But if people don't understand that and don't have the information, the government has felt that you can't leave those decisions up to people to make voluntarily, and we're going to have to sort of legally enforce these rules. So that's a form of paternalism. Of course, in this case, it's also for public safety, so it falls under the harm principle. But the idea of restricting people's behavior because they don't always have the correct or full information is part of what justifies paternalism. Um, the other reason is the individual really the only one harmed? So think about, the case of a seatbelt. Okay, so maybe someone doesn't wear the seatbelt. Let's say they get in an accident and they get injured, and then the police has to come, the ambulance has to come. They're taken to the hospital. Um, it's the public that winds up paying for a lot of this stuff, right? Or could wind up paying for a lot of this stuff. So in some sense, there is some burden on society when these decisions are made with only the thought of yourself. But then something happens, it does wind up affecting other people, or maybe the example you're setting. So you don't wear your seatbelt, but that will influence maybe your children to not wear a seatbelt. So in that way, you could be um, putting somebody else in a dangerous situation as well. So, with paternalism, that's tricky because, how responsible are you for all these other effects that could come out of your behavior? But that's one of the thinking also is that sometimes people think that these crimes are like victimless, right? That really no one else is injured except for you. There's no victim really. Um, but rarely is it true that it doesn't really affect anybody else. Okay. So, what are some of these other uh, behaviors that fall under the realm of paternalism? Motorcycle helmet laws are another really good example and a pretty controversial one. And so that's one more than seatbelts that was really controversial. And there's, of course, motorcycle riders who are very much in support of wearing helmets because they know about the safety and the statistics and that it's good to wear one. And others maybe know the statistics, but they still feel like they should be able to choose whether or not they wear a helmet. So this has been, remains a pretty controversial issue that falls under the topic of paternalism. Um, Drug use. So private drug use in the privacy of one's home. So not necessarily selling, right? Because in selling drugs, then you are leading to harm to somebody else. But just taking drugs in the privacy of your own home, again, the question arises, are you really harming anyone else? Now, some could say, well, yes, obviously, if a child is in your care, that's putting them at risk, right? But what if someone is just doing it in their home and it does not, they do it in their home, they don't leave the home, and then that's it. And the next day, I don't know how these things work, but like maybe the effects wear off. Did it really harm anybody else? Should that be illegal if no harm came to anybody else? Well, we do make it illegal. And again, the justification could be that it rarely will just not affect anyone else, right? There's people connected to you in your life or health effects down the road that will sort of fall under the cost that the public has to pay collectively. Um, and also, it's that people don't necessarily have all the information and don't really know how dangerous it is, and it could lead down the path of addiction and all those things. So it's something we feel like is so bad and causes so much damage to oneself that we feel justified in making that illegal. But as you listened to in the debate that you had the homework assignment about, and as we just did with marijuana, um, some people feel like taking drugs should not be criminalized. So that's an interesting thing to think about. And again, it falls under paternalism. Some people have said that maybe not make it illegal, but now there are some places where junk food, for example, is highly taxed. And it's a way of not making it illegal, but a way for the government to really highly discourage people from eating, or eating or drinking junk food or soda. Um, Now, some people say, well, if that's going to cause so much damage to somebody, and it does, right? Our country has a huge epidemic of obesity and diabetes and other health problems related to unhealthy eating habits and junk food. If it costs the public so much, if it costs people their own health, and they don't necessarily know all the information about why it's so bad, then how is that different than making, for example, drugs illegal? Shouldn't we do something about junk food? Now, a lot of us would, again, think that's ridiculous to make a bag of chips illegal. But again, if it's harming the person so much, people don't often have the full information. They're often feeding stuff like this to their family. Um, couldn't there be a justification to say that should be illegal? Now, most of us think that would be ridiculous, which is why, like I said, some cities are just putting really, really high taxes on these sorts of things to discourage it. But in the case of, junk food or other sorts of things, cigarettes is a good example. Cigarettes have not been made illegal, but we changed our approach to thinking about how we deal with the issue of people smoking cigarettes. What is the alternative to using the law to discourage certain behavior? If there's a behavior that we want to discourage, in some of those instances, we'll make a law about it. So, motorcycle helmets, seat belts, and drugs. But there's other things that are harmful, smoking cigarettes, junk food that we haven't made illegal. What could be the alternative ways of discouraging that behavior? So I want you to think about that. With junk food, again, high taxes has been one method, but maybe think about what's happened with cigarettes, and what was the way in which our society started to discourage that behavior without making it illegal. So answer that question and then come back and we will continue with the next topic.